I know you have a lot of things going on, and I appreciate you making the time for this. I'm just going to go through some PowerPoint presentations, and then we'll wrap up the meeting in about 45 minutes and open up for questions. And we were going to be joined tonight by Alan Delisle, but he had some family matters to take care of. So we'll talk to him next week. And then I'm just going to share my screen so everyone can see the PowerPoint presentation. Well, thank you again for joining us tonight. My name is Carrie Mueller, and I live in the Campbell Park neighborhood, and I'm just south of the Tropicana field. My background is in engineering and construction, and I recently served as a volunteer member on the Community Benefit Advisory Council for the historic gas plant redevelopment project. And I know everyone is very busy, so I'm going to summarize the 2 city meetings that were held last week about the gas plant redevelopment. And then I will cover the community benefits of the project. And I'll also go over the updated timeline and the process as the proposal moves through City Council. Tonight's meeting will be recorded and posted to No Home Run. Please send a message to 5 friends to watch the recording and to tune in next Monday. Most importantly, we ask that you call or write your City Council member. Residents won't get to vote on this important project, so your call and your letter is your voice, and it will be put on public record. You can also attend a City Council open forum session and express your views. Your vote is your power, and collectively, we can influence the outcome of whether we move forward on this project or not, using our collective votes as our leverage. Do not underestimate the substantial and growing group of concerned residents. Please visit nohomerun.com and let us know if you would like a yard sign. In regards to the Ray-Hines proposal, we want to keep the Tampa Bay Rays, but other cities have struck much better deals, and there is no reason why St. Petersburg should pay more than other cities and get less. We want to make sure the amount of the community benefits that we are receiving are fair based on the substantial amount of public investment. Previously, I worked as a professional engineer for the city of Miami, and I was reviewing construction plans for public works, and I often reviewed Midtown development drawings, the previous developer under the Kreisman administration. I've analyzed the development in great detail, and I have been following closely since Mayor Welch was elected and restarted the RFP process. As I have learned more and more about the current Ray-Hines development proposal, I have significant concerns about moving into a 30-year partnership with Ray-Hines. First, I'm going to go over a summary of the recent Community Planning and Preservation meeting. Then I'll touch on some of the comments made by City Council members during the May 16th City Council meeting. Then we'll talk about the community benefits associated with this project, and then we'll open up for questions. We're hoping to be able to answer questions following tonight's meeting throughout the week, and we encourage residents to check out the website nohomerun.com. If you have questions, please type them in the chat function, and we will address as many as possible following the presentation. We will try to follow up with the remaining questions throughout the week and are available by email and by phone to discuss further. So without further ado, let's get started. So we're going to talk about the development timeline for the Ray-Hines development as far as the draft that was released on October 26th of 2023. That was the first time that we had a chance to see what was in the draft terms of the development agreement. And it wasn't until April 25th that the final draft development terms were released. And 2 weeks later, a committee of the whole meeting was held regarding the redevelopment of the gas plant historic district. And then last week, on May 14th, a Community Planning and Preservation Commission meeting was held regarding the rezoning of the historic gas plant. On May 16th, the City Council met and many members discussed feeling rushed through the process. What was currently proposed for the schedule was an additional meeting on June 13th to go over the stadium, and they wanted to add another City Council meeting after that meeting, starting at 5 p.m. that would go over what the CPPC talked about regarding rezoning, the extension of the CRA, and the vested development agreement. So that's quite a substantial meeting for one day, and there's also going to be quite a few public comments. So City Council is expressing some concern, and they're also asking why it's being rushed. Currently, City Council is scheduled to vote on July 11th, but many City Council members are asking for an additional Committee of the Whole meeting so that they can review the comments that were made during the May 9th Committee of the Whole meeting and make sure that they were addressed. County Commission will also vote, but the date is unknown. This is a summary of the subsidies that Ray-Hines is asking for from the public. They're asking for a $287.5 million subsidy for the stadium. For this a sale of the 60 acres of land, they're asking for a $174 million discount on the appraised value of $279 million for a total of $105 million. They're also asking for $130 million in public funding for infrastructure. And recently, they added a $12 million lift station that will also be funded by the public. The county will contribute bed taxes in the amount of $312.5 million. Since the city of St. Petersburg doesn't have the money, they have to borrow the money using bonds, and the bonds have interest. So the total amount of the city's obligation with interest over the 30 years will be $704 million. If the county also bonds their contribution, that would be $586.6 million, which together is a total of almost $1.3 billion of public funds. This is the subsidies just for the real estate development itself. So you're looking at a $174 million discount on the land. And many people think that the appraisal is very low at $279 million. And it's also 3 years old at this point. The comparables that we're using it aren't very much like the actual 60 acres of land, and they're in different cities. So we actually think the discount's quite a bit more. So in addition to the discount on the land, the public is paying $130 million for infrastructure and another $12 million for the lift station. And if you add those together, it ends up being $316 million of a public contribution for the real estate development of the gas plant. And just remember, we're not receiving any profit sharing. We're acting as a development partner, funding the early cost without receiving any benefits or profit sharing from the profits. So just for an example, for what we're paying for the land at $105 million, Hines recently bought a warehouse in Tampa in October of last year for $46 million. So just one warehouse, they paid almost half of what they're paying for the entire 60 acres. And just keep in mind the way Hines is going to pay the city of St. Petersburg, they're going to pay us about $4.5 million every year for 12 years. They're not going to adjust the amount for interest or inflation over those 12 years. So just imagine if Hines tried to buy that warehouse from the seller in Tampa and asked if they could pay them over 12 years without any increases in interest or inflation cost. So what happened at the last Committee of the Whole meeting? This is just a review that we went over in our last meeting. So council members were not given much time to review the development agreement. It was released on April 25th, and they were only given 2 weeks to review it. They also had an all-day Committee of the Whole meeting on Tuesday, May 7th. That was for the budget. It was supposed to be 2 different days, and they put the meetings on the same day. So they had a very full day on Tuesday, and then Thursday they had a full day Committee of the Whole meeting on the historic gas plant redevelopment. They're very busy with work and family. It's difficult to read through the entire agreement in only 2 weeks. And also the Committee of the Whole was the first chance they had to ask questions about the new development agreement. And it was also the first chance to voice concerns with legal about the extensive protections of the developer and the minimal protections of the city. And it was the first chance to ask about the community benefits following the Community Benefit Advisory Council recommendations. So this is some of Rich Chief Lloyd's concerns at that first CAL meeting. He asked about some language that shows you can adjust the number of units as otherwise be mutually agreed upon by the developer in the city. And he asked if he was correct in thinking that that would mean that they can, in the future, have one person who decides for the developer that they're going to change the number of units. And the attorney did confirm that's correct. And Rob Gertis said that's something that we can certainly talk to Hines about in regards to changing it. And since then, it's come up multiple times. And the administration had said repeatedly that that's the floor, that they'll have to build at least many. But unfortunately, it took time away from the rest of the committee of the whole to bring this issue up with council to make sure that it wasn't going to be a problem. It wasn't quite finalized. He also noticed that the city doesn't have the right to terminate this agreement. And Rob Gertis said that that's true and it's on purpose. He said, we don't want to terminate the agreement. We could stop distributing parcels, but the developer has ongoing obligations. And I don't think we would want to terminate those. That's an ongoing internal discussion that we've had. And that's the reason for no termination in the document. And I don't really follow that, but to me, it sounds like they're not going to change it. And we need to make sure that we're going to be okay with that clause as is. The other thing Richie Floyd brought up, he saw that the projected tax revenues for the development are based on the target development. And in actuality, the developer is only required to build the minimum development. So the minimum development tax revenues only generate $340 million as opposed to $485 million, which is a difference of $135 million. And it actually means that the public investment is larger than the return of property taxes. So that's a real significant problem. These are some of the priorities that Gina had. She brought up a very substantial issue with the development agreement. If the Rays were voluntarily to choose to exercise one of their automatic early terminations and choose not to go forward with the stadium, she asked if they could still retain the land development. And Rob Gertis said that this would be fixed in future documents before voting. But unfortunately, it means that the final draft development agreement isn't really final and it's not quite ready to move from the cow to voting. John Muhammad also brought up a big concern. He asked, what are the consequences to the city if the city doesn't meet their goals? If the city doesn't deliver, what are the consequences? And James Corbett indicated the city's first obligation is to fund the $130 million for infrastructure. The other thing we have the obligation to do is build the lift station. And legal confirmed that if the city defaulted on its obligation to provide infrastructure in the lift station, that Hines Rays would be able to sue the city for damages. These are some tweets from the Community Planning and Preservation Committee meeting on May 14th. And Colleen Wright from the Tampa Bay Times has been doing a great job summarizing some of the key points from council members and committee members. And you can see here that committee member Wanamaker said that she's very much in support of the project, but she implores city council to take their time and negotiate on their council. She asked them to listen to the Community Benefit Advisory Council and other leaders in the development community because they have raised very relevant concerns. She names those concerns as low affordable housing penalties, excusable development delays, transfers of the development agreement, and material defaults by the developer. And she also talked about the affordable housing. She said no less than 8 times in this report does it mention a requirement to build a minimum of 600 affordable workforce housing units on the site. And she said, why is this just not an absolute mandate? Why is there even an option of buying out those 600 since this is such an important item? If that is the intent, then it needs to be in writing because there's no way to hold anyone accountable if it's not in writing. So I just wanted to really highlight that because it's very important and it needs to be completed. And I think, again, it shows that the final draft development agreement isn't necessarily final yet. And another commission member asked also about the affordable housing outs within the agreement. And it signals that the incompleteness of the documents are being noticed by others beyond just city council members. There were some questions from the public and also comments from city council members after the CPPC meeting and the May 16th city council meeting. They typically revolve around why we are rushing through this process for the Rays' sake. when there are many glaring issues in the development agreement. She asked, why are the development agreements submitted for review when they aren't ready? Why are we paying an outside legal firm over $1 million to help expedite these agreements if they aren't catching these issues before the documents are presented to council? So what happened in the last week's city council meeting that was held on May 16th? So here's a summary of our councilwoman Gina Driscoll's comments, and I highlighted the ones that I think are really important. And she said, do you want us to get it right, or are you just looking to get it done? Because we want to get it right. She indicates that if they had had a COW meeting, a committee of the whole meeting in February or March or April, then maybe the last week would have been a little bit smoother. And she also indicated that she thought that maybe we'll do a follow-up on some of the information that's been gathered since last Thursday's committee of the whole meeting. That would make sense. And it would be a way to show that we are going through this process in the sunshine, not behind closed doors. I worry about that. So I really hope that Gina Driscoll will be able to influence the administration to allow more time to review the development agreement, because I definitely think it's needed. And she says, we got to get some breathing room here and have a chance to do this right. And the public deserves to see how we're following up on the things that were brought up last week and moving forward. So I really appreciate her advocacy on this, and I hope that it results in adding some more time. These are comments from Colleen about Driscoll's main points. She's getting nervous about this rushing. It's starting to feel like red flags, and she doesn't want it to be. She's starting to wonder what's really going on. And she talked about how there was 2 meetings that week. The budget meeting, which was supposed to be 2 meetings, it got packed into one on Tuesday, and there was 2 back-to-back all-day workshops that didn't feel necessary for her. She said, when it's unnecessarily like that, I start to wonder where the priorities really are. Do you want us to get it right, or do you want it just to get done? And Lizette Hanowitz also brought up a lot of concerns about the process being rushed. She said, this is completely rushed. I'm the only attorney here on city council, and even for me, it was a ton of work. These are arbitrary deadlines. We have a fiduciary duty, and we have an obligation to do our due diligence for the citizens of St. Petersburg. And Brandy Gabbard said that she'd been reviewing the documents since January when she received the draft development terms. But Hanowitz responded and said there's a huge difference between drafts and getting a final draft and reviewing that. She said every word matters, and I don't base my decision on drafts that I received 3 months before. So I appreciate Hanowitz also advocating for further clarification. So the upcoming meetings that are currently scheduled include the Committee of the Whole meeting for the stadium on June 13th and the City Council meeting on June 13th. They may reschedule the City Council meeting, but currently they're trying to do them both in the same day, with the council meeting covering the rezoning from the CPPC, the vested development agreement, as well as the extension of the in-town CRA. So that's the summary of what's coming up. And then these are some tweets and community news from last week, just an overview of what happened, because so much is happening. It's a blur, and it feels like it just flies by, and it's hard to remember what even happened last week. So there was quite a bit that happened. So there was a silent protest on the morning of the Committee of the Whole meeting, included multiple groups as well as individual residents from Faith in Florida, the St. Pete Tenants Union, No Home Run, and Allendale Methodist Church. Then they held their Committee of the Whole meeting, which went until 6 p.m. And last week, they had the Community Planning and Preservation Committee meeting on May 14th. On Thursday, May 16th, the Sierra Club held a press conference. And then that afternoon was the City Council meeting. So who spoke at the Sierra Club press conference? Quite a few really important community leaders were able to speak at the press conference, and James and Michael McGrath from the Sierra Club organized it. They talked about some of the environmental priorities for the project that are very reasonable to ask and yet haven't been incorporated with the project. We also had Alexa Manning, who has been speaking since the day I moved here, year after year, trying to get people to listen to her. She did grow up in the gas plant district and has felt marginalized through this whole process. And she feels like this is a repeat of that same process. And it's very unfortunate and sad. And even Hal Freeman, who is a fiscal conservative, has issues with this project because of the burden to taxpayers and the debt that it's going to burden our children and our grandchildren with. We just need to be very careful if this is the right priority for our city. We also had Jabbar, who's the president of the Childs Park Neighborhood Association, speak, and also Brian, who's the president of Campbell Park, speak. And Jabbar spoke about the fact that it's one thing to provide homage to the residents, but what they really need is dividends. What they really need is equity. What they really need is home ownership and business ownership. So we've created a new page. It's called the St. Pete Community News. And this is a way that we can put all the articles about the community events and the city council meetings and news articles about the project in one site. Here's some recent articles from Councilwoman Lizette Hanowitz. It really outlines all the different problems within the development agreement regarding legal language. And you can see right underneath the title, it says, among other problems, the money coming back to St. Petersburg from the purchase price and the forecast tax revenue does not cover the total debt service. So when you look at community benefits that are promised about tax revenues that will be generated, you have to realize that the amount that we're contributing is actually more than we're going to ever get back. And we're really happy that the Weekly Challenger was able to feature an article that covered many of the different concerns with the project, including the fact that it's very imbalanced and fundamentally flawed. And you can see underneath the photo, it says, as outlined in the development terms, the public will contribute funds in 4 phases for a total of $130 million by 2035, while Ray-Hines will only pay a maximum of $50 million for the same period. So the public is contributing such a substantial amount of infrastructure, and Ray-Hines is only paying $50 million of the $105 million purchase price, and it's spread out over 12 years. So how is administration and the associated community leaders responding to community residents who are concerned with this project? And unfortunately, there hasn't been very many opportunities to ask questions and get answers. The only opportunities people have had are to make comments. And when they had the city hall on tour at Childs Park, I attended to try to get some answers. I talked to James Corbett about why the developer has the right to assign. And unfortunately, I didn't get a good answer. I was just told that's just what developers do. That's how they do things. And at the same time, J.C. Pritchett confronted me and asked me if I felt that I was qualified to be on the Community Benefit Advisory Council, which I did confirm that I was qualified. And then he went on to say that they already had the votes and the deal was going to go through. And it was just a really disappointing experience of trying to get some answers from the administration. This is an op-ed that Scott Wagman wrote, and I think a lot of people think that he's endorsing the project, but I think you have to really read what he says, because he says with one addition. And what he says is, for the price, Ray-Hines should pay an additional $150 million on top of what has already been negotiated. And he said it doesn't even add up to the full value. It's just enough of an increase to be reasonable, given the significant profits the Ray-Hines Group will realize over the next 30 years. So I really think that makes it pretty black and white as to how much of a gap we are between where we should be and where we are, if not more. And he also indicated that the mayor right now, his position is clear: get the deal done, period. And that's very unfortunate because it doesn't give us any negotiating room to improve the deal for the public. And Scott said that he wants baseball to continue here in St. Petersburg. I want the development of the historic gas plant site to pay proper homage and reparations, except there's no reparations. There's no home ownership opportunities or generational wealth created by the community benefits. So I'm going to switch and talk about some of the community benefits now. So a lot of the public expected that there would be more affordable housing with this project. And that is because of statements that were made by Welch throughout various different newspaper articles. And here's one that he said that he thinks we can set the bar higher. He said he's seen developments where they're bragging about 10% workforce housing. And he's saying that we need to be aiming higher because our community, we have a lot of people making $24 an hour or less. And in this article, he said since home prices and rents have shot up since the initial bids were solicited, and the proposed redevelopment should make affordable housing a greater priority. So those were words from Ken Welch. So that set everyone's expectations. You don't have to read through this. It's just included for your reference later, but it's a summary of the terms responded by Ray-Hines to our CBAC recommendations. And I just broke them out, a couple of them per slide, so we could go through them. So the Community Benefits Advisory Council requested that apprentices perform 15% of all hours worked. And if you look at my blue bold font, it says for the infrastructure, that's true, yes. But for the vertical construction, there's no requirement. And you have to remember that the public is the one paying for the infrastructure. So it's easy to add it for the infrastructure, but you have to wonder why they don't include it in the vertical construction. And is it because they don't want to encumber the future like land sales to another developer because there's a 15% requirement for apprentices and they're trying to minimize any encumbrances? And I don't really know the reasons, but clearly that benefit is not there. It wasn't responded to or provided by Ray-Hines. And that's a very important priority for the community. Number two, you can see that they requested contractors and subcontractors pay a responsible wage. And again, you can see that's included for infrastructure, but not for vertical construction. And you'll see that's a theme. So when they do that, in my opinion, they did not respond to the CBAC recommendations. But in the city's opinion, they did respond because they did some of it. That's the difference. So number 3 and 4, 3 is we requested that they use the Office of Supplier Diversity's definition of a small business enterprise. And it does appear that the definition is the same. The CBAC requested that they use the city code for reporting requirements of apprentices and other disadvantaged workers. And again, you can see that they complied for infrastructure, but not for vertical construction. We asked that they construct the development to a minimum of LEED Silver standards, which shouldn't be a problem for Hines. They build projects all over the world that are at very high standards. LEED Silver should be their normal standard of construction. But when we asked for that, what they did in response was say, we'll do LEED or all these other programs, which include Energy Star, which is just a measure of how much energy, how much electricity a building uses. It has nothing to do with sustainable building practices. So this is a non-responsive response to our ask. It's really unfortunate too. And number 6, we requested that they build 300 on-site units for affordable and workforce housing by 2028 and prioritize the development of AMI levels at 80% or below. And what they did in response was agreed to build 100. So just to put that in perspective, the only thing that's required to be built on the development site by Ray-Hines by 2028 is 100 affordable housing units. At that time, the stadium should be completely finished, and we're only going to have 100 units with only 300 by 2030, and the remainder can be built out over 30 years. And the minimum development requirements, the first deadline isn't until 10 years after the project starts in 2035. So the CBAC, we requested that liquidated damages for failure to construct the workforce housing and affordable housing be increased to $150,000 on-site and $175,000 off-site. And the way they responded, they increased it from $25,000 to $50,000 in the year 2037 and to $75,000 in the year 2047, which is 23 years from now. So I can't imagine that $75,000 in 2047 is worth any more than $25,000 is today. So basically, they only have to pay $25,000 to get out of building a unit that would cost $300,000. We also requested that the intentional equity was indexed to inflation, and they denied that request. We requested that 5 million of the 15 million was committed to affordable workforce housing. And their response was that they would ensure that these funds are used to address the community's greatest housing needs. And the last one is that we requested a portion of the 50 million intentional equity commitment to be used to fund a city-led rental assistance program. And they declined to respond to that request. So if you count those up, I'm at about 4 of those that I think were actually addressed out of the 11. And that should say 11, not 12 on the right. And additionally, several other community benefits that were not requested have been added. And that includes, they added 50 affordable housing units. So now they're at 1,250 units in total. They committed to add at least one daycare, childcare, preschool, or similar, but they haven't defined what that is. That's within the minimum development requirements. And they added a 20,000 square foot grocery store, but that's within the target development plan. So it's not actually required to be built if it's not in the minimum. And there's some liquidated damages for failure to meet certified business contracting minimums, but it's only 850,000 with a total of 1.6 million at the end of the project over 30 years. So it's very insignificant. So Lizette Hanowitz brought up a very important point about the community benefits regarding the museum, which Ray-Hines has committed to providing $10 million to support the construction of. However, if you read the fine print, there's a precondition that requires that the Woodson African American Museum have finalized financing plan, evidence of sufficient financial commitments, and a guaranteed maximum price. And it all has to be done by July 1st of 2025. And it appears if they don't meet these preconditions, that the money is forfeited and it's not going to something else for the city. It's just not going to be distributed to the city at all. And so Hanowitz brought up some great questions about why there are preconditions for paying the $10 million. Why are there any preconditions? And the attorney tried to explain the Ray's point of view that they want to see the rest of the money before they commit 10 million. But Hanowitz has the right point of view because she's saying that that's the city's money to begin with. And there shouldn't be any preconditions. And I don't see why there should be any conditions as to whether we get the money. And also that money in hand is better than money over the future. So those were great points she brought up. And Gina asked again for a better connection to Campbell Park, and she was denied. So the catwalk that we have will remain in place, unimproved, and the previous developer had an extensive multimodal overpass. So Gina had asked for a better connection between Campbell Park and the stadium, and it was denied. She asked to study the conversion of 175 to a boulevard. That was denied. And she asked if there was any investment into Campbell Park Recreation Center, which there's not. And she also brought up the Carter Woodson Museum, and she specifically asked how much has to be raised by 2025 so that we know what the requirement is by dollar amounts. Here's the bridge that was proposed with the previous development. This is what I was hoping and expecting we would have to connect our neighborhood to the rest of the city. And it's very unfortunate because there's been a pattern of the south side being on the wrong side of the tracks, being on the wrong side of the wall that is 175, and that doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. There's no like priorities from the Rays or Hines to do anything to remedy that. And so you're looking at $6.5 billion being invested on the north side of the wall of the highway with blight on the south side. And it's just very unfortunate that that's where we've arrived at. These are a summary of Midtown's benefits. You can see that their affordable housing was all on site. They had 1,000 affordable housing units spread throughout the project footprint. And on the next page, number 3 at the top left, you can see they were going to commit $30 million in equity to fund the building of initial 200,000 square feet of small box retail and creative office with associated parking. That was for the community's retail business opportunities. San Pedro Gazette is an excellent resource for the summary of the community benefits. I think that they did the best job in summarizing the community benefits draft term sheet. You can see the article headline here. And they also just recently published one about the response from Ray-Hines to the CBAC's recommendations. And they did this great graphic. It shows you what the $50 million amounts to compared to the overall investment of $1.3 billion. And you can see it's less than 4%. It's roughly 4% total of the entire project cost is what this community is receiving in benefits, and we're contributing over 96% to the developer. You can see that we're also foregoing any property tax revenue on the 22 acres of the land the stadium will sit on, as well as foregoing any naming rights and foregoing revenue sharing of any kind on either the stadium or the real estate development. This is a recent article a lot of people saw that came out last week. It's in regards to Hines pausing their $4 billion project in San Diego. That's similar to our project, which is actually more. It's actually $6.5 billion that they're trying to build here. And they halted this construction project and they cited economic conditions, which include high interest rates, as well as high material and labor costs for construction. So the question is, the conditions are the same in St. Petersburg. So why would we have any assurance that they're going to complete the development for us if they just pause the development in San Diego? And this is a great 60 Minutes episode a few people may have seen. It talks about the issues with commercial real estate and offices and how offices are very in dire straits right now. Except for St. Petersburg, we have a very strong demand for Class A offices. But I really highly recommend watching that because it's going to be a serious problem nationally, especially for developers and real estate owners that are in office. And this is the example of what happened in Miami with the Florida Marlins and now the Miami Marlins stadium. You can see it was a very turbulent timeline. We may be looking at something similar to that with our own city, where it was struck. The deal was initially struck in 2008 and approved, but there was a lawsuit that was filed, and then the state funding fell through. The mayor was voted out, and then after 7 years, the stadium was complete. And now that it's complete, it sits at only 40% of occupancy with lower average attendance than the Tampa Bay Rays Stadium at only 14,000 fans. And a couple weeks ago, they had a game with only 3,000 people in attendance. And just so we remember who negotiated that deal, the president of the Miami Marlins, David Sampson, is notorious for bragging about ripping people off and talking about, F you to the public taxpayers after he got $1.3 billion from them. He talks about some of the schemes and how they perpetuate the con. This is a situation in Miami where the soccer team was trying to do a real estate development. And at this point, David Sampson actually teamed up with a filmmaker to try to expose the scheme. So he's kind of flipped sides, and now he's giving out all the secrets of stadium schemes. So I just wanted to put up the contact information for council members. Here's a map of their districts. And also all these council members' comments are going to be uploaded on the St. Pete Community News. So you can watch the specific testimony from your city council member and respond to that. Here's the committee of the whole meetings, and it shows like each person's comments. So what can we do to influence the outcome of the proposed development? The most important thing is to contact your city council member. You can contact them by email, by phone, and you can also drop off a written letter at city council. And we're compiling emails from various neighborhoods, especially in Gina Driscoll's district. I have a letter from almost like 10 different neighborhoods in her district. So if you are within her district, please contact me because we would like to add your letter to our letters from our neighbors. And also that your contribution of time, just like today, it's the most valuable thing that you have to offer because this investment of time will allow you to take this information and share it with your community. And if you could just continue to do that once a week, it will really help get the word out. On Thursday, May 23rd, from approximately 3 to 7 p.m., the Sierra Club is looking for volunteers to help distribute yard signs in Coquina Key. So please contact me or Michael McGrath on Facebook for Sierra Club Suncoast to help with that. And then please refer people to the No Home Run website and go to events where you can watch this presentation as well. And you can go watch this presentation as well as the last two that were made. And please contact us if you'd like to be more engaged and know about future opportunities to speak in public forum, as well as attend events to advocate for a better outcome. So thank you very much. I'm just going to open it up for questions now. Let me just stop sharing the screen. And I have a question here. I'm just going to open it on my phone really quick. Okay, so someone brought up the fact that one of the talking points for this agreement was that the Rays would be responsible for any cost overruns to the stadium and the city would not be. And I presume the city is responsible for any overruns on the infrastructure improvements. Is that correct? With the lift station, they added $12 million with no effort. And I think that's a really important point because Alan Delisle indicated very early on with the way this deal is structured that he doesn't believe that the Hines Group will ever pay any infrastructure. If they do somehow go over the $130 million that's publicly funded, they then will assess all the future building renters and owners to pay for the additional, I think it's $54 million that they might need. So they're not even paying for that. They're getting a interest-free loan from the city, and then the city will pay back the loan with assessments against future building renters and owners. So that seems to be the pattern of where you're seeing very little investment up front, and it's all picked up by other parties. So as far as like cost overruns go, I mean, I think you can see from the example in San Diego that if they feel that it's not in their best interest financially, they're not making enough of a profit, they'll just stop working on the project and move on to something else. So I think that that could be the case with this project as well. So if anybody else has a question, you can unmute yourself and you can ask it. Well, I really appreciate everyone's time. Rebecca, do you have a question?
Oh,
yeah, Jamar.
Yeah, I got a question. Does anyone know what's the standing of the Rays contract to stay in St. Pete?
I think they're getting ready to review the non-relocation agreement, but I don't believe that there's any way to sue. I think the way to enforce it is pretty weak, and I don't think that they've improved it. So I think it's worth paying attention to when that comes up and being very involved to see what the actual language is about that.
So this is the second part of my question. So we're going to enter into a deal with them right now today, and they don't make a commitment to even stay here in the future?
Yes, and that was what our representative Gina Driscoll asked, and it was confirmed that that is still currently an option that they could exercise, and they would have to change it before that is no longer an option. And so it's very concerning that the development agreement was presented with that still being an option for them.
Yeah, I think it's bad business to enter an agreement with this longevity to it without getting a commitment from them to stay.
I think that's a really good point. Thanks for bringing it up.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
You know, I've been reading a few things, thanks to you, about the museum and some other developments that the Rays are trying to propose. And what bothers me is the museum situation. Those residents don't need a museum. They need, like you said, generational wealth. They need better infrastructure. They need to have that, you know, the I-75 walkway gone, you know, that whole development. And I'm just not sure about this museum because people are like, oh yeah, but they're building us a museum. You know, museums are nice, but you walk in once or twice or three times and then you're done with it. You know, how does that benefit the neighbors?
Well, I mean, in my personal opinion, and I think a lot of people would agree that I just think it's such an amazing opportunity to highlight the African American history of St. Petersburg. And I think that there is so much here in this region. And I think we all agree of how important and special that is. But unfortunately, I feel that we get exploited because we really care and we really want to see that in actuality. And so it's like they're kind of dangling it out in front of us as a potential, but with the preconditions, there's just no guarantee. And it seems like if we're going to be contributing over $1 billion of public funds, it seems like at a very minimum, we should be able to have the museum constructed entirely. And I think what's happened is you have city council members that are advocating for the special interest of their constituents. And so I think that that's like a primary goal of Deborah Figg Sanders to get that project, to get the project approved as an entirety in hopes of getting that museum funded with the $10 million. But it just seems like it's not actually guaranteed it's going to be built. And so that's where we're really wondering, like, there's all these kind of promises of community benefits, but when you look at the fine print, it's always like diminished. And there's always like a lot of preconditions, and there's always a lot of ways to opt out. And so unfortunately, I don't know if even if this project was approved, if the museum would actually get built. And I think that was a really good question to bring up.
Thank you.
Karen, I agree with you. They'd have to raise another 20 to 30 million dollars in order to get the 10. And that's a really heavy lift for a small organization like that. So it's more likely than not that that museum would never get built given the conditions.
You know, even if they could just extend the timeline for the fundraising, I mean, they're giving themselves 10 years before they have to deliver the first 1/3 of minimum development. So why is the standard only 1 year to raise the remaining funds? It just shows again just how unbalanced the deal really is. Dick, you want
I agree with you. They should just build the museum, period.
Exactly.
They should make the whole museum.
You bet. I agree 100%. Go ahead. Dick.
Well, great show, Karen, and great stuff. Thank you so much. I appreciate being part of it. Just on I got a couple of comments past the museum, but one on the museum is I really think it's important to get across that what's the main people here to honor and to benefit and to fulfill promises were people who lived through this. The people who live through something don't need a museum. Right? The people that now want to know about it and say, gee, that was too bad, a museum is great. Museum is great for raising their children. And I just would want to make sure that try to get people to understand that the number one priority is the people in the gas plant descendants and the current St. Petersburg, South St. Petersburg people that need help for a better lifeway, right? And I like the museum. I'm a big fan of it, right? But there's a lot of stuff that has to go on ahead of that makes better lifeways and gives opportunity to the people. The big thing that I didn't really come up with that 10 million, by the way, is if they don't give the 10 million to the Woodson, right? Do they keep it or does the city keep it? That question really never quite got asked and it never really quite got answered. And I'd like to hear that answer as well. The other thing that I'd like to point out is that it's ringing clear here that the target plan is not the plan. The minimum development plan is the plan. The presentations we've heard are on the target plan, right? It's really vital that we get the city and the Rays, the negotiating team, to come back with another presentation that is on the development plan, because that's what's being committed, right? And I believe that we've committed, we, the public, commit almost the same amount of money to the minimum plan that we do to the target plan, because I haven't seen any differences. And it goes to it's a bad deal to start with. I don't mind having a good deal also help others, but I object to us losing money, the public, right, to get other people to gain, right? So all the fluff stuff, right? So thank you very much for doing this. And there's lots of comments from a lot of places. I do have one other question, and that is legal aspects. Is the idea here is to stop this and fix it, getting a legal issue going is a good way to stop it so we can fix it. And I'm concerned about the TIF, right? The CRA for in-town TIF is funding about $20 million worth of infrastructure in town west. It's a different TIF. I don't know if that's legal. Right. The other thing is that TIF money came out of a CRA, which was supposed to do slums and blight, right? And it would in that area, right? Because of it's the fact it's unless you say a parking lot is a blight, and somebody just said that, right? I don't think there's any blight in the anymore in the Midtown TIF CRA, right? So what's this doing for anyway? Also, it's very clever that the infrastructure for the stadium is included in the gas plant development. Right? That means that the stadium development gets their infrastructure for free. And I think that's about $20 million.
Right. So
just
we went over that. If
Hello.
you don't mind, I'll just talk about it right now because I have the slides from the first presentation. And we did talk about the in-town CRA because we talked about what tax increment financing funds are,
Great.
which is how they say they're funding it. But the TIF funds come out of the in-town CRA. And this is a map of it. So
Perfect.
clearly,
Perfect.
it shows that it's Central Avenue, the most valuable real estate in the city on Central Avenue and Beach Drive is within this, including the new high-rise 400 Central. So 50% of the property taxes from 400 Central will be siphoned off potentially until I think it's 2042 to pay for these stadium bonds. And then after 2042, the money starts coming out of our general fund. So you can see the payment reschedule. These are the TIF funds in the third column over. And then after 2042, you can see all the money starts coming out of the general fund. And so the only money the Rays is paying is 50 million in the first 12 years. So it's very unbalanced. And then you can see that the infrastructure money that we're contributing goes to the stadium. You can see all this is where the new stadium will be. So they talk about it being for the development so we can get tax revenues, but you can see for yourself, it's just additional subsidy for the stadium.
And that's $40 million for the stadium right there. Primarily, there are a few other developers. The key point I want to bring up is that if anybody's interested to try to, if we have any contacts with lawyers, law firms, Southern Poverty Law Center, to try to question the legality of, can you take a TIF for money for blight and slum, right? And use it for the utilities for a stadium
Well,
that you're not going to get any money back on. Right?
yes, I
Secondly,
think that you bring up,
can one
let me
TIF
address that first one real quick before you move on to something else. I just wanted to address the fact that many of us have the very same concern.
Sure.
And we have been in extensive conversations about it, but it does seem that they anticipated our response and they're still probably going to figure out a way to do it anyway. That's my take on it. And that's what will be presented at that June 13th city council meeting. So the soonest we can get our hands on the agenda for that meeting and the sooner we can inform ourselves, then we can know what's going on. So I think it's a great point.
And I'd like to say, do we have any contacts with the Southern Poverty Law Center who was around the edges of this?
So Faith,
Yes.
yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, somebody just put a comment that they're working on it on TIF
Oh, great.
in the chat.
Great. Yes, and also I see the comment about the pause on the San Diego job because I think that is so significant. Why is our job any different? We have the same high interest rates, we have the same high material cost, and we have the same high labor cost. And so the land, we're basically going to hand it over to them. It's not going to cost them anything, cost them $4 million a year. Plus, we're giving them the infrastructure, so it's not costing them to build the infrastructure, which greatly improves the value of those properties that they could potentially then sell to someone else.
Could I get a couple of comments in?
You bet, Tom.
First, I do agree with Dick Pierce. The neighborhood was destroyed, but the people are here. They moved south. Some of them moved up to nicer neighborhoods, and some of them were in other troubled neighborhoods. And we've suffered from health disparities and crime, and a lot of people ended up in prison. There's not a lot of help for them to get reentry. And I, beyond not helping the neighborhood, I think this development will increase gentrification, and a lot of tenants will be evicted, and they won't have replacement housing available. So they may have to leave. I know someone who just moved to Ruskin from South St. Pete. It's more affordable over across the bay. One last point. I think there's just too many strange things in this deal that are confusing, and maybe we may miss a lot. I think it really can't be fixed in time for their breaking ground for the next baseball season. I think we really need to pause for about a year at minimum. Offer the Rays a 1-year extension on their lease.
I want to respond to that because I saw your comment, and I think everyone in attendance is 100% in agreement. But I just want to bring up the fact that I think that this deal was put together well before the mayor was ever elected, and it was done in a very sophisticated way. We had someone who worked before for Clinton in the Obama campaign, who came in, was donated $50,000 from the Rays to get the mayor elected. And they know that there's going to be opposition. They know who all the players are. I've had people complain about the progressives or something like this. So they anticipated who's going to oppose them. And so the problem is they're kind of like 2-3 moves ahead of us on the chessboard. And what we have to do is really aggregate our leverage as voters. And the only leverage we really have is to not vote for anyone who approves this deal in the future, and to vote out the people that are currently in council that would approve it. So I just want to really emphasize that. And I think that our priority should be to aggregate our voting power and to start communicating to city council that not only are we going to vote them out, but we'll never vote for them again if they approve this deal. But unfortunately, it's probably likely that it might go through because, like I said, they told me at the city hall on tour, they already had the votes. They had decided before they even saw the draft development agreement, much less the final draft. And so I think that they should be held responsible, because I think it's so irresponsible as far as the finances of the city, and it's burdening the children of our city and grandchildren with this debt. And you're talking, Tom, about how expensive it is to live here. And can you even imagine having that much more of a property tax burden because of a stadium, and the trade-off that we're potentially going to make for our residents, that we're going to add a stadium, but then we're going to lose our children and grandchildren's ability to stay in the same area. And I think that's what it really comes down to. So I just implore everyone to really aggregate together so that we can pressure our city council members to vote no. And that if they do approve this, we need to continue advocating to keep them from being in office.
I agree.
Anybody, any other questions? Claude?
Yeah, Claude Fletcher. Claude Fletcher.
Go right ahead.
I only found out about this nohomerun.com yesterday. Who owns the stadium now, and who will own it in 99 years if this goes through?
It stays with Pinellas County. I think that's the way they can structure it so they don't have to pay property taxes. Then they get paid $1 million in rent for 25 years.
What about after 25 years?
In 25 years, the theory is they'll come back and do this all over again.
Okay. What about the buildings around? Who will own the buildings around the 68 or on the 60 acres?
It'd be all privately owned. So we're gonna subsidize all the infrastructure and give the land to them at a very deep discount. And we're giving away all our property rights. Currently the city of St. Petersburg, all the residents are owners of that land. And we're gonna have it transferred as a public wealth transfer to a private corporation out of New York and Houston.
Wow.
Can I, can I
Go
make
ahead.
a comment? I'm in Chicago and also St. Pete. I go back and forth. And we have a stadium here, and the area was just very similar to the area that they're going to propose building in St. Pete. It was predominantly lower income, very blighted. 20 years on, it is still a blighted neighborhood. People go to the stadium. There's a couple of places, but pretty much everyone leaves because everything that you want is under that one roof of the stadium. They make their money and they buy their drinks and their food and pay for the game under one roof. And then they all go home to their suburbs or to their townhomes or whatever. Even the churches did not get any extra money or benefit from that area. And the parking people make a ton of money. So I don't know. I mean, their plan looks like it's much more extensive than the one in Chicago by the United Center. But 20 years on, we are no better off because of the, these guys they have a playbook of development areas. There's a playbook involved, and it's try to get the best, cheapest deal. We're going to make as much money as we can, get out, and not really benefit the local people. So I just want you to keep in mind that these people are not in it for benefiting the neighborhood at all.
Right. And when you're comparing other cities like Atlanta, and I think it's San Diego, where they did both a stadium and they did real estate development, the city did not subsidize the infrastructure for the real estate development. That was done by the developer. And they also didn't give them the land at a deep discount. They bought the land at market rate. So even when you compare it to similar projects, it's still worse than that. So it's very unfortunate.
Raping and pillaging, that's their
Yeah.
playbook.
It seems to be a competition to see who can rip off the next city the most. And I think we're in line to be next. And I would like to do everything possible to prevent that from happening. And, I'm going to continue to work very hard, and everyone here has worked extremely hard. And I see JC Peterson, I see you're on the call. I really appreciate you mentioning this project on your show. That was wonderful. We really shared that amongst a lot of us.
Leo.
Very
Leo.
encouraging. So thank
Leo.
you for doing that. Yes, Lou.
Good, Leo. Leo, good. Where'd you go,
Okay.
Leo?
I really appreciate everyone's time. Thanks so much for calling in. And I look forward to talking to you again next week, and have a wonderful week. Okay.
Karen, great job.
Thank
Did
you very
a
much.
fantastic job.
Great job.
I
Thank you
appreciate
so
it.
much.
Appreciate you.
Great job.
Thank you.